wait, stop the bus, it's market day. I'm here in Rigello, a small town outside of Florence, and we're having lunch with my friend Sandro, who's cooking for us. So it's a very exciting day for me. And I thought, well, as a nice Italian girl, I best bring a gift. So what better place than to find some fresh seasonal ingredients right here at the market. So I'm looking for my friend Enzo.
Tre, signora?
Tre, sì. Bella fiori. Per cucinare,
Guarda.
bellissima, grazie.
Buongiorno,
Buongiorno,
signora.
Christian. Scacciata?
Schiacciata di nostra produzione.
Tutto perso.
Divido in due?
Sì, sì, grazie.
Prego.
We're buying a lovely scacciata, which is a local bread made from his own production. So it's going to be a lovely gift for our Sandro.
Ecco qua, signora.
Grazie. Quant'è?
5 euro.
5 euro. Grazie.
Le faccio lo scontrino.
Ciao, buona giornata.
Grazie.
Alessandro,
Ciao,
buongiorno.
Cristina.
Grazie,
È un
grazie.
piacere.
Un piacere per me.
Ci
Un
divertiremo
regalino,
oggi.
un po'
Wow.
di scacciato e un po' di frutta del
Grazie,
mercato.
grazie.
Grazie, andiamo?
Ok, grazie.
So, che facciamo?
Allora, preparare questo brodo di verdura.
So we're going to start
Ok.
a vegetable broth.
Sì, intanto utilizziamo questi 3
Grande,
pezzi di...
come questo?
Va bene così,
Ok.
anche questo.
So 3 big chunks of red
Ok,
onion,
poi-
4 big
bene.
pieces of carrot. We're dividing 2 small plum tomatoes
Bene,
in half
ok.
into the
E ora
broth.
del sedano.
Sedano, this is celery.
Non ci mettiamo del sale
So
perché...
no salt.
Va
Okay,
bene,
and so
quindi
by
questo deve
using
essere-
big chunks in the broth, this way it's just going to give a mild flavor to the dishes that we make. And this is going to be un'ora?
Beh sì.
About an order, about 1 hour. Un'ora. 1 hour. Okay.
Allora, qui lavoriamo a 4 mani perché la dobbiamo preparare, ci prendiamo, ce la facciamo a pezzetti così.
Okay. So you see we have 2 different methods of peeling squash. And Alessandro is much faster than I am. Okay, so we're going to dice some onion from this last piece. So some extra virgin olive oil. Meta.
Tutto.
So the onion goes into the oil. So more sliced garlic. And so by
Perfetto.
using sliced garlic, it's not so strong as minced garlic. So because pumpkin is sweet,
Ok. Allora, dobbiamo preparare.
so we're cutting the squash into small pieces so it cooks pretty quickly so that we can puree it. Così.
Sì, 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 perfetto.
Grazie.
Sì, sì, ancora.
Okay. So he said there's much more squash than onion and garlic because obviously it's a risotto with squash, so that's your main flavor, and the others are there as supporting cast. Ancora?
Sì.
So we're going to take the rest of these squash pieces and slice them really in tiny, tiny pieces because they're going to go into the risotto. This is going to be pureed. I just said, do you want me to finish all these pieces of squash? And he said, I don't know. We're cooking, and we're cooking for a bunch of us. How many people? So it's you look and you see how much you need. So now we're just adding a little bit of salt to the squash that's already cooking.
Anche qui mettiamo un po' di pepe.
And a little bit of black pepper.
Ecco, vedi, qui possiamo già cominciare a sfruttare un pochino
Okay?
del nostro brodo.
So now he's adding to the squash a little bit of our vegetable broth, which was
Perché-
really simple and mild flavor, so it's just going to contribute to the sweetness of the squash.
Io me lo dico, sì, va bene, ok, e poi faccio...
He's saying that his son is a chef and does things very differently than he does. Things are more dry or more strong, and but he doesn't. Alessandro doesn't consider himself a chef at all. Chef.
No, questo
Cuoco.
è diverso, cioè, ma
sì,
vedi,
certo,
bisogna...
certo.
Capito?
So he said the difference between, because I
No,
said he's
so-
like a chef. He said, no, not at all, because unlike a chef, he opens his fridge and what he has, he turns into a meal. Whereas a chef has to be precise and this dish, and we know in America that the dish you have today in a restaurant has to taste the same next week. So it's very different, the precision of a chef versus a cook cooking by instinct.
Io intanto continuo a seguire la nostra zucca che è vicina.
He's adding broth to the squash, so it continues to get soft.
Ok, qui.
So the squash is just a tiny, tiny bit hard, and he said that would result in a puree that's not mixed well, not homogenized well. So you need your squash to be just a little bit soft. It's delicious, but it needs to be a little softer. Alessandro,
Sì,
questa mattina, cucinando insieme, va bene, perché anche prima di cucinando,
sì.
dimmi qualcosa della vita. Chi lavora?
Allora, io non lavoro più, sono pensionato.
Ok,
Non è che mi occupi di qualcosa in particolare,
ok.
perché ho deciso, è stata una scelta questa, perché ho deciso di lasciarmi il mio tempo libero
Ok.
per poterlo utilizzare volta per volta
Ok.
a seconda di quello che si sarebbe presentato. Cioè, voi oggi, tutti noi abbiamo fatto questa cosa bellissima, simpaticissima, perché cioè, io non ho altri impegni. Elisabetta mi ha telefonato e dice, possiamo fare questo? Sì, capito? Cioè, questo per dire che cosa? Che ho scelto di lasciarmi il tempo libero, da utilizzare in qualunque modo, anche con
Perché prima di tempo libero, che lavora?
Allora, io ho lavorato in banca.
So he worked in a bank in
Yes.
Firenze?
Firenze è bellissima, però bisogna andarci, quindi io passavo la gran parte della giornata, del tempo, fra il lavoro e il viaggio e gli spostamenti, quindi non mi rimaneva molto tempo per altre attività.
He
Capito?
said that he spent most of his time traveling back and forth to work. You said like a pendulum.
Sì.
Che dice pendolare?
Pendolare.
Pendolare, which is to go back and forth, and so you decided no più, no more.
No,
Va bene.
no.
Figli?
Figli, io ho 3 figli.
3 kids?
Giulio, che
Ok.
ho 2 nipotini con Giulio, che
Ok.
vive in Svizzera, Federico, che è
Federico.
qui in giro, e Diana
Diana è un'avvocata?
è un avvocato. Sì,
Brava,
sì,
brava.
sì,
E in questo tempo,
sì.
che è un giorno tipico? I asked him, what's a typical day?
Sì.
Cucina tutto?
No, anzi,
Tutto il tempo come io?
tutt'altro. Cioè, mi piace questa domanda perché è bello possibilmente non avere molti programmi, cioè alzarsi la mattina e dice stamani cosa faccio? Se piove mi faccio le parole crociate oppure mi guardo il giornale su internet. Questa modalità mi ha permesso, quando ha telefonato Elisabetta,
He said because
di
of
dire,
this, when Elizabeth
possiamo
called,
fare
he could
questa
say-
cosa?
he could do
Ok,
it.
facciamola.
So the squash is ready.
Ci aiutiamo con un cucchiaio.
So the cooked soft squash is going into this little sort of mixing pan. It's almost like there's a cream in the pan that just came from the olive oil and the squash cooking
Allora,
together.
aspetta, perfetto. Ok.
So you can see that it's so soft and rich looking just from the sugars in the squash and the garlic and the oil. And so now we're just going to use an immersion blender and make a puree of squash. And we're not adding any liquid. We want a nice thick puree.
Vai?
See how lovely this got. It's just, it's, è buonissimo. È buonissimo.
Buono? Perfetto. Va bene. Allora,
Il momento arriva.
Allora, facciamo l'ultimo piatto di questa mattina,
Ok.
che è il nostro risotto. Va bene?
Ok.
Ci abbiamo messo olio.
Okay, about to start the risotto, and he prefers to use his oil, local oil, for something like this. So again, use the best olive oil you can find. If you don't grow your own olives, you'll have to just buy the best you can. Sandro, I want to say something that Sandro said earlier that I missed, which is that he may not be the best at technique, and sometimes he doesn't know if he's the best cook, but the most important thing for him, and it's true, is that everyone gathers around the table, a tavola, tutti a tavola, so that everyone is together eating. And I think that that's the most important thing to take away from this idea of cooking dinner. Okay.
Allora, mettiamoci la zucca.
Okay. Okay.
E il riso.
Riso. And this is riso di Maremma, which is nearby the beach in Tuscany.
Benissimo.
So you want to cook this for a few minutes stirring until the rice is almost toasted. It becomes shiny with oil. It doesn't matter, the squash will soften as it cooks, but you really want to get the rice sort of toasted. The temperature is not as important as it is to keep your eye on it, and you'll know when your rice is toasted. It'll just start to shade a little bit, and it's all shiny with oil, so you'll know that it's ready to go. It's not so much about your flame or the time. You have to pay attention. E anche gentilissimo.
Sì.
If you notice, he's stirring very sort of gently. He's sort of nurturing the rice. This isn't a saute where you're in there active and aggressive. Rice is a very calming, gentling food anyway, so to cook it this way is quite lovely.
Ci mettiamo un po' di vino bianco.
A little bit of white wine.
Ok.
Che bella pezzi di zucca. Che preparare. Posso ascolta quando
Ah,
pronti.
sì, è vero,
You can
è vero.
hear when it's
È
ready.
vero.
It sizzles a little bit, the rice. So now he said you begin the process, which is
All'inizio fare una
very
grande
traditional.
fumata. Eccolo.
You go around the edges, and now you begin to slowly add the broth. And when you cook risotto, you want to add your broth to sort of cover the rice like this. And then you'll cook it until the rice absorbs the broth, and then you do this over and over and over. So it's important at this point to lower your heat. The rice has toasted. You don't want to cook this aggressively anymore. You want your rice to keep a small boil. So it's not a super low, but it's like a medium low. Because you can see it's still boiling a little bit
Esatto.
around the edges. And that's
Sì.
what you want so the rice cooks
Esatto. Sì, sì.
at some point in your life. Now we're going to watch it and pay attention and slowly add broth as it absorbs. And midway through cooking, we'll add the pureed squash. So we'll keep watching this, and then we'll come back and you'll see when we add the squash. So Alessandro said, as the rice gets close to finishing,
Okay.
the most important thing is as the rice finishes cooking that it takes on the flavor of the pumpkin, of the zucco, the squash. And this is going to change the consistency and everything in the rice. Oh my goodness, this is lovely. And we are now about, I would say, about 8 minutes from it being finished. And so now you stay very vigilant, keep your boil, and then the next time we see this, it'll be finished and creamy. We're lowering the flame a little bit. Okay, va bene, now we finish. He just added the last bit of the pureed squash because what's the point of risotto with squash if you don't taste squash?
Olio?
Olio, adesso?
Sì.
So he told me to go around with the oil.
Questo qua.
Wow.
E questo è il nostro risottone.
And here we have, come. Here we have a risotto with squash. Perfetto. Quando scopra suo amore di cucinando?
Allora, io credo che sia stato un po' nei geni, nella indole, perché mamma è molto brava a cucinare Anche perché uno dei miei figli è chef,
Okay.
va bene? Quello che vive in Svizzera, ma anche gli altri, anche Federico che vive da solo, eccetera, riescono a cucinare molto facilmente. Quindi io credo che ci appartenga che sia una cosa genetica, no? Poi bisogna anche che tu abbia la passione, se
Sì,
no
lo so.
non...
Alessandro, grazie.
Ma no.
Ancora. Un bello giorno.
Sì, è stato un piacere anche per me perché ci siamo divertiti.
Grazie.
A
Grazie,
presto.
grazie. We're going to start the preparation for the Pappa al Pomodoro, the tomato bread soup.
Sì.
So we're only using a small amount of onion because the flavor outside of tomatoes and bread in this dish is garlic.
Questo tutto.
So now we're putting in a good amount of garlic. Piccolo.
Sì, va bene. Sì, ok. Così.
So the garlic is more finely diced for this recipe because we want a stronger garlic flavor. So he's using his hands to pull apart the tiny pieces of the onion so that they separate. You know how when you put onions in a dish, sometimes they stick together. He wants them
Okay.
all pulled apart. So you have to use an abundant amount of oil to make a good Pappa al Pomodoro. You can't be cheap with your oil. You got to go for
Okay.
it. I'm bringing over his basil from his garden.
E basilico, va
So
bene?
the stems go into the bottom of the papa and the leaves remain here. It's not a really aggressive heat because he wants the onions and the garlic to soften slowly, and then the tomatoes will soften slowly, and then the bread will soften slowly so that all the flavors come together to create one wonderful papa.
Dobbiamo preparare il pane
Yes, we have to get the bread ready for bread soup.
e poi magari fare 3 pezzetti così,
Okay.
ok?
Sì, io
Vai.
faccio.
Il nostro soffritto, perché così si chiama, il
He
soffritto.
said he's going to keep his eye on our sofrito, which is the base of the soup. So I'll cut the bread so that we don't burn the onions. So we have all this bread here, but Alessandro just said if it doesn't seem like it's enough, we have more bread. There's always more bread when you're in Italy. And this is just a sort of what we would call a rough chop of the bread, and it's crust and all, because the crust will melt. So he's taking the basil stems out
Sì,
now,
sì, ora lo leviamo.
because they've cooked enough.
A questo punto buttiamo il pomodoro.
Okay? So he said, even though you're buying tomatoes that might be canned, the goal is that you buy the best quality you can find. I mean, he's of course using Tuscan tomatoes, canned tomatoes. They're very good quality, but even when you're in the supermarket, you can find the best that you can find. He's using a fork to break the
Ma hai ragione
tomatoes.
te.
I said I do it with my hands, and he said, it's okay.
Hai ragione te, hai ragione te. Cioè si fa, anch'io avevo pensato di farlo con le mani.
He said either way is right. Because the texture of this soup is not smooth, smooth, smooth. It's kind of a chunky, it's a lovely, rustic, satisfying, heavenly. You can never get enough of Pappa al Pomodoro. So we're putting a little bit more fresh basil in. And Alessandro said, if you put in too much basil, it's too exaggerated. You just want a little bit as like an underflavor.
E quindi dice quanto? Non lo so.
He said,
Basta così.
he said for this soup he uses a heavier, coarser salt. So how much do you put? Who knows? Like this.
Allora, questo è il grande momento. Mettiamo il pane.
This is the big moment where we add the bread. Così.
Sì.
And now what happens in this soup, for those of you unfamiliar, is the bread will melt. Tutto?
Direi di sì. Ok. Speriamo
And then
bene,
you sort of mix it around and you kind of smash the bread down a little bit and make sure that the tomatoes sort of cover it so the bread can soften. There's different schools of thought. Some people like to break up the bread before it goes in. Some people use it whole. He's using it in chunks like this. Before he adds any broth, he likes to flavor the bread with the tomatoes the way his mom did, so that you can see the bread is turning pink with tomato. And so then he will add the broth after. By ladles, so he knows how much to add, so he doesn't add too much and make the soup too thin. Colore buonissimo.
Ti sembra, vero?
Sì, è profumo.
Allora, abbiamo bisogno di un colo e ora lo prenderò.
So the bread melted really quickly, and he added enough broth to just cover, and then he said, we'll see if we need more. So he said a lot of people say at this point where the bread is melted, the tomatoes are in, the broth is in, you're done, you're ready. But he said you have to really let it simmer for a little bit so that the flavors all blend and the bread really melts and you have this lovely sort of homogenized Pappa al Pomodoro.
Ecco, a questo punto mettiamo altro basilico.
Tutto?
Sì, e se ci piace ce ne andiamo a prendere fuori e ce ne mettiamo ancora fra un po'.
Okay, so now we're adding the rest of the basil. So you don't want the basil to become too exaggerated, so now you add just a little bit more at the end. And you can see that it's already becoming really, really creamy, even the crust. And that's the goal, that even the crust becomes creamy. So that there's no difference between the inside of the bread and the crust of the bread when you bite into Pappa al Pomodoro. So he's going to put a little more broth because the bread keeps soaking it up, which of course would happen. It's bread.
Ecco, la pappa al pomodoro sarebbe per me, secondo me, un gravissimo errore.
Oh, he said a grand error that people make when they make Pappa al Pomodoro is they take an immersion blender and mix it instead of letting it melt. And I said that's as bad as breaking spaghetti. So don't do it.
Basso, vedi? Molto
Okay,
basso.
so the flame now is really, really low. You just want a tiny, tiny, tiny little, see how it's
Okay.
just a tiny little
Sì.
bit of bubbles?
Sì.
That's what you want. So this soup is
Abbastanza.
pretty quick. In half an hour, it'll be completely ready, but a low, low, low simmer. Sandro, grazie mille.
Guarda,
I loved cooking dinner with my new friend Alessandro. So what are you waiting for? Let's get back to the cutting board and I'll see you next time on Christina Cooks the Macroterranean Way.